Hello everyone and welcome to a new video on Aloysius Academia. In today's session we will cover something very interesting, especially for high school students and any pre-university student who are about to start their university journey. So at university you will be exposed to different teaching methods. So it's not just one teaching method that you're going to be facing. So the main aim of this video here is to introduce you to these different teaching methods and put more emphasis on one method, which is called the EBL method. And hopefully in future videos we will cover the other different types in more details. Okay, I think a very good start point is to try to make you aware of how university teaching will feel like. Okay, because a lot of students, I see them, they come with a misconception that university teaching will just work as a school lesson, and that's not true. Because in school, that's the normal way of teaching, where a teacher introduces a topic, you explain, and then he or she explains the content, gives examples, and then tells the students what they need to revise. And possibly you will just take some notes during the session, and that's it. So that's basically the teaching way at schools. However, that's a very passive way of teaching where the student is not really engaging with the learning process. They are just being bombarded and thrown at a lot of, with a lot of information, but they are not engaging with the learning itself. They are expected to just sit quiet, hear very closely to the lecturer or to the teacher while they are speaking, giving and explaining the topic, just taking good notes, and that's it. So this might still happen at university, particularly in lectures, okay? Because lectures, it's like a large group teaching form of teaching, in which you would have just one lecture, a theater full of students, and the lecturer will just explain the topics. And again, you will just need to take notes. Possibly the teacher might or the lecturer might tell you what to emphasize on and highlight important stuff that you need to revise and stuff like that. Not in a very similar way to school, in which they are literally telling you what you need to learn, but in lectures are very similar to that. However, there are other teaching methods at university, and in these teaching settings the students are expected to develop certain and use certain skills. And these skills might include: the students might need to analyze a scenario, they might need to identify what they already know, so they need to realize, what do I know about the problem, and also recognize what they don't know, creating questions and learning objectives for the lesson that they are having. Okay, also they might be asked to investigate evidence independently and explain their reasoning. So these are different skills that normally you're not developing them in this type of teaching, where you just sit down and hear the lecturer or the teacher delivering the class. So at university, there are different teaching methods. So as we said, the lecture or a school, it's a type of large group teaching. However, at university, there are going to be some small group teaching, tutorials and seminars, some independent study as well. You might be given just few information during a lecture, and then the lecturer will ask you at the end of the lecture to go and do your further reading, and you come up with the content and with the things that you need to learn. So all the teacher will give you is just the aims of the lecture, or maybe what's known as the intended learning outcomes. So it's just a list of points where the teacher or the lecturer will tell you that by the end of this lecture you would need to be or you would learn about these number of points, and then you will be expected to go and do the further reading on these points and generate the content for that. Okay, and that's independent study. Also, there's a lot of lab sessions, and all that they will be part of active learning. So active learning, again, it's different to the passive learning. In active learning, the students is engaging with the learning process. Okay, it's like, for example, as we said here, creating questions. Maybe in an independent study, you create the content and make the notes of the things that you believe that you would need to revise before the exam, rather than just the lecturer or the teacher gives you a PowerPoint or a slides with all the content that you need to learn, and then you just sit at home and revise them. So it's more you are engaged with the learning, and that's active learning. Good. So let's have a formal definition of active learning now, which maybe hopefully will make it clearer for you. So active learning, it just means that the students are doing something intellectually meaningful with knowledge rather than just receiving it. So in other words, as we said, you don't just sit and receive information and receive the all the things that you need to study for the exam. In fact, you are engaging with the learning process during or while you are having the class. So in an active learning session, the students are expected to retrieve information. Okay, so it's not just receiving information. You might be asked to retrieve information, to question the information that you are given during the class, to explain the information that you are given during the class. You will be also asked to evaluate the information. And evaluation, it means whether is this information correct or not, is it supported by strong evidence, things like that. So this is all that you might be asked to do during the class. You also might be asked to discuss the information that you have in the class with other classmates. And also you might be given examples in which, or problems in which, you would need to apply the information rather than just recall the information. Okay, and all these skills you're going to be developing them in an active learning session. Why the universities are introducing, or there's a lot of active learning in universities, that's because studies have shown that active learning is associated with stronger performance at exams, lower failure rates, and also better understanding for the topic. So active learning will encourage the student to engage with the session, and this improve the understanding of the topic for the student. There are different active learning approaches, but the most common approaches used at universities nowadays are inquiry-based learning, EBL, problem-based learning, and team-based learning. So in this video, we will focus on EBL, but we will touch on PBL and TBL a little bit just to understand the difference between the three. So let's have a look at the three the different teaching methods we just mentioned, and just explain very briefly the differences between these three, or explain briefly what is the main action that the student is needed to do in each of these sessions, and then we will support all that with the examples later on. So in an EBL session, the student, you will be, for example, given a problem or a scenario, for example, okay, and the student is asked to tackle this issue in a broad, evidence-informed understanding, okay, of the issue. That's what the students are asked to do. They need to have a broad understanding of the whole issue, and come up with the questions. And again, we will show with examples what do I mean with that. In a PPL, it's very similar to EBL. However, the difference is that you are not tackling the issue in a broad sense, but you are answering and giving an explanation to a specific direct issue that the scenario is highlighting. Okay, and also again, we will show that with examples again, and hopefully it will become clearer. TBL is a bit more different to EBLs and PBLs. So in a TBL, you will be again given an issue or a scenario, for example, and instead of just discussing it randomly, TBLs are more structured, and during the session, the students are asked to come up with decisions and solutions for the issue that they have in hand, however, in a team-based way. Okay, and also they need to show all their evidence and reasoning in a team-based way. And again, we will explain just in a few slides what do I mean with that. Okay, so now let's have some ideas and understand why EBLs and PPLs are easily confused. And as I said, TPL is a bit different to both of them, so it's very easy to understand how TPL work and not confuse it with EBLs and PBLs. However, when it comes to EBLs and PBLs, there is a lot of substantial overlap between both teaching methods. And the things that are shared between these two teaching methods are the following. Okay, so in an EBL or PBL class, the students are expected to have a scenario. It will involve a small group teaching. It's usually like between 10 to 12 students. That's the whole class. So it's very low in number. You would have a facilitator. So who's a facilitator? So in an EBL or PBL classes, you do not call the teacher a lecturer, for example. No, you call them a facilitator. And that's because the teacher role in EBL or PBL class is different to their role in a lecture theater, for example, or what you have been used to at schools, where the teacher teaches you the topic. However, in an EBL and PBL, they are called facilitator because they are not teaching you anything. What they are doing is that they facilitate the discussion between you as a group, okay, between each member of the group of the 12 students they would have per class. So they are just facilitating. If, for example, so the facilitator saw that the student start going off track from and moving away from the issue that they are discussing, then they will just lead or facilitate the student to go back to try to answer the main question that the issue is raising. Okay, so it's just facilitating the discussion. The teacher is not teaching, or the lecturer is not teaching at EBL or PBL. They are facilitating. Then also the students are expected to discuss prior knowledge. So for example, in an EBL class, let's say that you have an EBL class on DNA. Okay, so it's very possible, and that's usually how it works in universities, is that the week before you would have been given like a lecture or taken a lecture on DNA. So now you are expected to apply that knowledge and use that knowledge during the PBL or the EBL class. Other stuff is like you need to identify the learning gaps. Okay, so you do not expect the facilitator to tell you what you need to learn. So you need to read the issue that you have in hand, and then you need to come up with, okay, what do I not know about the issue, and what do I know about this issue? So you need to find the gap in your knowledge. Okay. Also, the students need to generate the learning questions. Okay, so for example, the 12 students who are in a class, they will read the issue, and then they will say, okay, they will start asking questions, asking themselves. Each member of the students, they need to contribute and participate in this discussion, and they will start asking questions that will help them understand the issue that they have in class. Also, doing independent study, which usually the students will need to go and do some further readings and research on the topic, and then come back, and then they would need to report what is shown here, to report the findings that each student found, to report back to the group. Okay, and here where they would have a discussion, and then they would need to reflect. So what is reflection? It's a long story. I have made a different video. There's a video on my channel. You can go and watch it to understand what reflection is, but you need to show reflection also in your answers. So basically, PBLs are basically a focused form of an EBL. Okay, so an EBL, you will be investigating the broad range of the issue. However, in PBL, you'll be answering specific questions. So I will give you now a real scenario of the difference that will hopefully clarify the difference between the two, but just always have in mind that a PBL is a focused form of EBL. Okay, so let's have now a real example, okay, to explain the difference between EBL, PBL, and TBL. So that's an example I have. So this example is just a simple one, and I chose a simple example for the sake of the video and for the sake of explaining it clearly. However, in universities, you would need to expect to have a more complicated issues, a longer issue with more details in it. But again, here we are just explaining it, so I would stick to that simple example. So the issue we have in hand now is a patient with a bacterial infection hasn't improved after taking an antibiotic. So that's the issue we have. So we know, or what I have explained a few minutes ago, that we have the three different active learning methods: EBL, PBL, and TBL. And I gave like a brief description of what the students would need to do. Okay, so let's have a look now how each of these explanation are in real life when you are, for example, tackling this scenario. So in an EBL class, the students would be asked to, or are expected to ask this question. They would ask, what issue should we investigate about this problem that we have here? Okay, so to explore questions raised by the scenario. So what possible questions could be raised by this scenario? For example, what's a bacterial infection? That's one possible question that could be raised. What's an antibiotic? Why some bacterial infections do not respond to antibiotics? So if you get what I mean, it's just these wide question that builds wider understanding of the issue we have. Okay. In a PBL, it's a bit different. So the main question that the students are expected to ask, why did the treatment fail? So if you see now that in PBL, we are directing our focus to the patient, to this patient in specific, personally, why this patient treatment didn't work. So you would be in this case, you would be generating different questions to what you generated in an EBL. So in a PBL, you would answer the first thing. You would need to generate possible explanation for why this patient's treatment didn't work. And a possible, for example, question is, what is the patient history? So that the first thing that I need to know, what history does that patient have? And then you would need to apply the learning back to the patient case. Again, you need to always make it specific to that patient that was mentioned in the issue or in the scenario. Okay, hopefully now you can see the clear difference between the two. So in an EBL, you will ask just the wide question to understand the issue in general. For example, as I said, you would need to, in an EBL, you would need to search for what a bacterial infection is, what an antibiotic is, when antibiotic resistance happen, and how can we overcome it. These type of general questions, they are not specific for that patient, but they are just general information. However, when it comes to PBL, we would be concerning specifically about this patient, why the treatment in this patient didn't work. So that's the main difference. When it comes to TBLs, the main question that the students would ask is, what is the best response to the problem we have here? But again, as I said, in this session, we will focus on EBL. So I will let detailed explanation of TBL to be in a hopefully a future video that I will make. But for now, it's very important for me to that you understand the difference between these two teaching methods, EBLs and PBLs. So in support to what I have just been saying, let's have a look again at the main difference between EBL and PBL. The key distinction, if we look at the scenario that we've just given, a patient with bacterial infection hasn't improved after taking antibiotic. So in an EBL and a PBL class, the main question that the students will be tackling is different. So if you are in an EBL class, you will be asking this main question: what issues raised by the scenario should be investigated? In a PBL, you would ask why this patient treatment failed and what further information on action is needed for that patient. So if this antibiotic doesn't work for that patient, what are the alternative, for example, for this patient? So to help you understand more, so these are the type of topics that the students would explore when they are in an EBL class for this issue. So the students might explore antibiotic resistance, adherence to taking the antibiotic, prescribing, lab testing, the public health effect. So for example, what is the effect of antibiotic resistance on public health in general? Infection control also. on a wider nation level. So if you see from these different things that the students would or are expected to explore in an EBL session, they are very broad, they are very general, and you can see that they are not specific to that patient, but they are answering more, general question to this issue. In a PPL, it's a bit different. Again, the students would need to generate and evaluate possible explanation for this patient. So you would need to know the patient history, what type of bacterial infection does the patient have, what type of antibiotic does the patient, for example, was the patient given, and what are the alternatives. So things like that. They are all revolved around this patient. So it's not like general stuff. The outcome then is justified response to the case. Again, back to that patient. So hopefully now it's clear the difference between EBL and PBL. And now let's dive into EBLs and understand exactly how an EBL class will go. Okay, so let's dive into more details. What's an EBL? So an EBL, in an EBL class, usually the student will be given a specific problem or scenario. That scenario will require some investigation, okay? And then the students are asked to decide which questions need exploring, okay? What questions do they need to ask to explore this issue in full? I'm repeating this again because this is very important. The students need to have and develop this mindset before the EBL class. They need to understand that in any EBL session, they need to answer that question. What do we need to investigate in order to understand this issue? So that's the main aim in the EBL class, to come up with questions to understand what you need to investigate to understand this issue clearly. So let's have a look at step by step at the normal EBL cycle, and that is made of different stages. And the first stage of an EBL class is encountering the inquiry or the scenario or the issue that you have. So sometimes the scenario will be revealed a few days before the session. In other courses or universities, you might just get it a few hours before the session. So it depends. But it starts with receiving the scenario. Once you receive the scenario that you are expected to read, the student needs to assign a chairperson and a scribe. So as I said, in an EBL class, you will have 12 students, okay? Between 10 to 12 students, and those students need to agree among themselves to assign one of them to be the chairperson, which is the person who would lead the discussion. And as I said, the teacher or the facilitator in an EBL class, do not expect them to teach you anything. They are there to just facilitate the discussion. So for example, if you are discussing something about bacterial antibiotic resistance, for example, and the facilitator saw that the students start generating questions on, for example, plants or on E. coli, for example. So that might be related, but it is very far related because you wouldn't need to start searching specific bacteria, but they will just get you back to on track to understand what is antibiotic resistant, okay, in general. That's just an example, but always remember that the facilitator will jump in if they feel that the students are moving off track. And then so the chairperson will just lead the discussion. If the students are all talking at the same time, the chairperson will just try to arrange to manage that and give some time for each student to talk. So that's a responsibility of the chairperson. And then the scribe. The scribe is a person who would just write down all the questions that the students will come up with and all the ideas and things that they would need to search. So the scribe is just responsible of writing all that down. So these two roles are very good in your CV because it shows leadership, it shows involvement in learning. So they are very good. So I would always encourage students to be a chairperson and a scribe or a scribe for like multiple times, because this is very good for your CV when you apply for universities or when you apply for jobs after that. So in stage 2, what you need to do is clarifying the issue. Okay, so you have the inquiry or the scenario. You need to ask yourself, the students need to ask themselves, what exactly is happening? Is it an issue of antibiotic resistance? Is it a cancer issue? Is it viral infection issue? So what exactly is the issue that we are dealing with here? And then highlighting any unfamiliar terms. Sometimes it's going to be just the language barrier, which makes the word not understandable. So the scribe would need to write it down. And other times it's going to be a scientific maybe term, which all the group maybe they wouldn't know. So the scribe need to write it down, and then the whole group need to do some search on it and make all the unfamiliar terms familiar. And then they need to decide what is the broad issue. They need to understand what's the broad issue. As I said, that's the main difference between EBL and PBL. In an EBL, you need to understand the broad issue that the inquiry or the scenario is concerned about. In an PBL, it's different. You will be asking what this patient problem or what's the issue with the patient itself. Then in stage 3, you will be start using what you have learned so far about the topic you are about the issue you have in hand. So what do we already know? You need to write down that. I know sometimes it feels like something intuitive. Anyone would know what we know, but you need to write it down. In an EBL, you need to write down what do you know. Okay, we know the patient age, we know the patient, for example, gender, we know what bacterial infection they have. You need to write down what do you know about the issue. And then what do we think we know? So any assumptions you have about the case, you need to write it down. That's what you think you know, but you're still not sure about it. And then what assumptions require checking. So if the case is presenting any assumptions, then you need to write down whether these assumptions are confirmed or do we need to search them further. In stage 4, you will be identifying the gap. Okay, you identify what's missing from your understanding. So for example, if you are going through the bacterial infection case, and then you found that you have no idea about antibiotic resistance, so that's a gap in your understanding, and that's a big area that you need to start searching on to be able to understand this issue in full. Then in stage 5, you will generate inquiry question, which means the student turn the gap into focused question. So if the gap was that you know nothing about antibiotic resistance, then you would need to start generating questions on that. So what is antibiotic resistance? What is an antibiotic? Why some bacterial infection they become resistant in the first place? And like that. So these type of questions. So all the things that you don't know, you need to turn them into questions, and that's a skill or one of the main skills that the EBL is trying to develop in student. Okay, it's to allow you to have to develop the skill of knowing how to ask the right questions and not just random questions, asking very focused questions to help you understand a specific issue. And that will help you with your career in medicine, in dentistry, in pharmacy, even in things like engineering, anything that has problems or problem solving issues. You would need to develop the skill of knowing how to develop the right question that is important for understanding an issue. And then in stage 6, we get to the plan the investigation. Okay, so you would ask questions like what evidence are required. Okay, so which evidence is required to search for, and then which sources to use. So if you want to search what's an antibiotic resistance, then which sources you would get your information from. So obviously you would not take them from something like Wikipedia. Wikipedia, it might be a good source in terms of just having a general understanding of something, but the information in Wikipedia are not trusted because anyone can edit Wikipedia page. So what you need to do is to look at trusted sources, for example, published papers in good quality and peer-reviewed journals and papers, and also things like trusted websites like WHO or NHS, things like that are trusted, and the information you get from that, they are reliable, so you can use them to understand the issue that you have and to answer the questions that you come up with. And then you need to decide what the final output should contain. And that's different from one class to the other. Sometimes the facilitator will ask the student to come up with intended learning outcomes at the end of the session, which means at the end of the EBL session, they need to come up with, for example, multiple points, and these are the intended learning outcomes of that session of the EBL. Which means that to tell other students, for example, who weren't in the class, that if they went through their research and went through the questions that the students developed through the class, they will learn this at the end. So, for example, in the antibiotic resistant issue, intended learning outcomes could be by the end of that issue, by the end of that case, you will understand what's a bacterial infection, you will understand what's an antibiotic, what's an antibiotic resistance, why some bacterial are resistant to antibiotics, what alternatives do we have once a bacteria become resistant to a specific antibiotic, and things like that. So that's the intended learning outcomes that sometimes the facilitator will ask the student to come up with at the end of the EBL session. Okay, so how should a student prepare for the EPL? So the first important thing that you need to understand is that an EBL case will usually be split into two classes. Okay, one is called the open session, and the other one is called the closed session, and they are usually a week apart. Okay, and preparing for each of these sessions is you're gonna prepare differently. So on the open session, let's say it's gonna be on Monday. Okay, and before the opening session, you will prepare via using these, which we have covered already, but you would read the scenario carefully, you highlight unfamiliar terms, note any relevant previous knowledge you have, identify possible issues while you're reading the scenario, write any possible questions, and avoid conducting a random literature search. So you need to have a very specific focused questions before you do your literature search. So by that, you would have a focused literature search. If you don't come up with the good questions, then your literature search will be random and you will not understand the issue in full at the end. So all that is going to be done on the first open session, which is, let's say that's on a Monday, for example. Then you would have a week between these two sessions, the open session and the closed session. So during that time, you are expected to prepare a direct answer to the agreed inquiry questions. So let's say that during the open session, you came up with 30 questions that you believe answering these 30 questions will give you the full understanding of the issue you have or the scenario you have. Then between these two sessions, what you need to do, each member of each student in the class, okay, each student should have a direct answer for the agreed inquiry questions. Also, they need to use credible answers, sources. And as I said, you need to use things like NHS or published papers. And also, they need to learn how to explain the evidence simply. Then identify any uncertainties. So for example, if any questions that were highlighted during the open session, you feel that you're not certain what the question means, for example. So you need to write that down, and then in the closed session, you can discuss it further. And also connect your answer always to the wider inquiry or to the wider issue that the scenario is raising. Okay. And again, that's a very distinctive characteristic of EBL, that you understand you develop the wider understanding of the issue. During the closed session, let's say the closed session is going to be on a Thursday of that week or a Friday, so you would have almost a week to prepare for. So during that, you are expected and you need to be prepared to practice short explanations. So once you are in the closed session, the whole group will just come together. Let's say 10 or 12 students that made the whole class. They will come together and they will start discussing among themselves the answers of the questions that they have developed in the opening session. Okay, so each of those students, so for example, if one student want to share their answer with the rest of the group, that that student need to practice short explanations. Okay, avoid reading an entire written report to answer a question, because the other students might not understand you. Also, the main points of your answer might be lost if the answer is very long. So you need to not just search for answers during the time between the two sessions, but you need to practice short explanations that are direct and answering the questions that you developed in the opening session. Also, be ready to discuss the answers with your group. Okay, engagement is something very important, and part of the facilitator role is to encourage a student to participate in the EBL session, either through becoming a chairperson or a scribe, or just by sharing their answers that they have found during their search period. So that's basically what an EBL and how you prepare for it. An important point to highlight is understanding what students would gain from the EBL cases. Before we continue, please, if you find this video helpful, support the channel through like, comment, subscribe. That will encourage me to, upload future videos. Thank you. So let's continue. So in an EBL cases, the reason that the universities uses EBL classes is that EBL develops problem-solving skills. Things like encourages students to be curious, analyze complex situations, understand how can they tackle complex situations. Maybe at school, you haven't developed a specific strategy to tackle complex situations, but after having multiple EBL classes and multiple EBL cases, you will develop your own strategy of how you tackle complex situations, which is something that will help you even with your personal life, not just with academia. Also help you generate possible explanations, thinking out of the box, also having critical thinking as well. So all that is going to be developed through multiple cases as you are having the EBL cases through your degree. Also, you will understand how to make evidence-based judgments, especially important for example, if you are applying for medicine and you want to become a doctor, you need to apply order to learn that all the decisions that you give to the patient, they are evidence-based judgments. It's not just something that you heard about or something like that, but there are strong evidence that supports whatever judgment or claims you propose. And then revise conclusions. Also, you would learn how to revise any conclusion, how to reflect on any learning you had, how to doubt whatever conclusion you came to if you hear like a different argument from a different student. So this teamwork and communication skills that you develop during the dynamic of the EBL class, they are very important for your journey in university, as well as for your personal life and developing different transferable skills. And these skills that you develop through EBL sessions, they are relevant to medicine, if you are applying for medicine, if you're applying for dentistry or pharmacy. All these courses, they would require these skills, as well as once you graduate from these courses, you would need to apply these skills in your career as well. It's not limited to health related courses. Also engineering would require that, and basically any career that requires complex decision, that's what the EBL would develop. It's basically developing your problem solving skills, your communication skills, your debating skills. All that are developed in the EBL classes. I hope you find that very clear. Thank you, and see you in a new video.